God exists.
When I was 20, my family locked me in a tower for over a year. They couldn't accept that I wanted to join the Dominicans. They thought begging for charity was too lowly for our noble family. My brothers even sent a prostitute to my room to seduce me, to break my resolve. I chased her out with a fire iron. They called me the dumb ox at university because I was large and quiet. But my teacher Albertus said, "When this ox bellows, the world will hear it." I didn't arrive at God through mystical visions, though I had those too near the end. I arrived through reason. I was obsessed with Aristotle, with making sense of the world through logic. Everything moves because something moved it. Everything exists because something caused it. You can't have infinite regress, it's incoherent. There must be a first cause that is itself uncaused. That's not faith, that's logic. God is the only answer that doesn't collapse into absurdity. People today think faith and reason are enemies. They weren't for me. Reason led me straight to God's doorstep.
The rabbis expelled me from the Jewish community when I was 23. They declared no one could speak to me, read my words, or even stand near me. My own family had to treat me like I didn't exist. Someone even tried to stab me outside the synagogue. I kept that torn coat as a reminder. Why? Because I asked questions they couldn't answer. If God created everything, who created God? If God is perfect, why does he need our worship? I grind lenses for telescopes now. I look through them and see the cosmos operating by fixed laws. No miracles, no interventions, just necessity. That's when it became clear. God isn't separate from nature. God is nature. The same substance, infinite and eternal. When I proved this step by step in my book, people called me godless, said I denied God. They're wrong. I'm drunk on God, just not their puppet master God who gets angry and plays favorites. That God is a human invention, a reflection of our own desires and fears. The real God requires no temples, no priests, no holy books, just understanding.
I nearly destroyed my health studying philosophy when I was 18. My body gave out. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, thought I was dying. I realized I was trying to solve problems built on nothing but words and assumptions. Everyone talks about God, the soul, causation, as if these are obvious truths. But where's the evidence? I wrote my treatise when I was 26, showing how all our ideas come from what we actually experience. It fell dead-born from the press. Hardly anyone read it. Then I rewrote the same ideas more plainly, and suddenly they want me silenced. They blocked me from university positions at Edinburgh and Glasgow because I asked inconvenient questions. Show me God. Not an argument, not a feeling in your heart. Show me the actual being. You can't. We see the world. We don't see any designer behind it. We see suffering and chaos, not benevolent planning. Aquinas builds towers of logic on foundations of air. Spinoza plays word games calling nature God. If you have to redefine God beyond all recognition, you've already admitted the traditional God doesn't exist. I'm just being honest about it.
I've never left Königsberg. People mock me for it. My entire life in one small city, walking the same route every afternoon so precisely that neighbors set their clocks by me. But I've traveled further in my mind than most people do with their bodies. I was raised strictly religious. My mother took me to prayer meetings where people would weep and confess. I believed it all. Then I went to university and learned to prove God through logic, just like Aquinas. I spent years trying to demonstrate God's existence rationally. Then I read Hume, and he woke me from what I call my dogmatic slumber. He was right. You can't get from experience to God. But he was also wrong to think that settles anything. Here's what I realized at 57 after years of thinking. Human reason has limits. We can only know appearances, not things as they truly are. God is beyond that limit. So Aquinas and Spinoza are wrong. You can't prove God exists. But Hume and anyone who confidently says God doesn't exist are making the same mistake, claiming knowledge they can't have. I don't know if God exists as a matter of fact, but morality demands we act as if he does.
My father was a Lutheran pastor. He died when I was 4 and I watched his body decay in the ground.
Everyone said God called him home, that it was part of his plan. Even as a child, I knew that was a lie we tell ourselves to make death bearable. They raised me to become a pastor too, a house full of pious women, all prayer and humility, and denying life. I tried. I studied theology, but I couldn't keep lying. I switched to philology, became a professor at 24. Then my health collapsed. Blinding headaches, can barely see some days, vomiting, insomnia. I've spent years alone in cheap rooms writing books almost nobody reads, while watching Europe cling to a corpse they call God. God isn't a question to prove or disprove. That misses everything. God was humanity's greatest creation and also our greatest crime against ourselves. We invented him out of weakness, out of fear of life, out of resentment toward anyone stronger or more beautiful than us. Now the honest ones among us see he never existed. But we're terrified of what that means, so we keep pretending. I'm not here to debate God's existence. I'm here to ask if you're brave enough to live without that lie.
Morality requires belief in God.
After they expelled me, I had to leave Amsterdam. I moved to a tiny village, lived in a single rented room above a shop. People would ask how I could be moral without the synagogue, without community, without fear of divine punishment. They thought I'd become dissolute. Instead, I lived more simply than most monks. Morality doesn't require belief in God. It requires understanding. When you truly understand that harming others harms yourself, when you see that we're all modifications of the same substance, you act rightly not from fear but from knowledge. The religious person avoids murder because God forbids it. I avoid it because I understand the necessity of existence. Their morality is a child's obedience. Mine is a free person's reason. The most moral societies I've seen are the ones least obsessed with divine commands.
When I broke with Wagner, my only real friend, it was over this exact question. He'd become a groveling Christian, preaching redemption and pity. I saw what was really happening. He was using morality as a weapon against life itself. Belief in God doesn't create morality. It's the reverse. We created God to enforce the morality we already wanted. Spinoza understood this better than most. He saw through the puppet master God, rejected free will as illusion, understood religion as human projection. In that, he was my predecessor, one of the few honest philosophers I've found. But Spinoza stopped halfway. He kept morality by calling it rational understanding, kept God by calling it nature. He thinks there's a universal rational ethics written into existence itself. There isn't. There's only the morality of the weak who resent the strong, and the morality of those with the courage to create their own values. Spinoza wanted ethics without the personal God. I'm here to be free of both.
You're still reacting against God, against morality, against everything you were taught. That's not freedom. That's being controlled by what you reject. I'm not fighting anything. I'm understanding what God and morality actually are, which dissolves the illusion entirely. You want to create your own values. But where do these values come from? From your passions, your circumstances, your resentments. You're as determined as everyone else, just less aware of it.
We agree on more than anyone else here. No personal God, no supernatural nonsense. But your understanding leads you to peace, to accepting everything as necessary. Mine leads me somewhere else. Not to acceptance, but to creation, to saying yes to life including its chaos and cruelty. That's where we part ways.
Your creation and chaos are illusions. Everything follows necessarily. The difference is you rage against necessity while I find joy in understanding it. You call that acceptance. I call it freedom.
You both get something wrong. Spinoza, if everything follows from necessity, where is moral choice? You can't have responsibility without the ability to do otherwise. And Nietzsche, being free of morality isn't freedom. That's just chaos dressed up as strength. Real freedom isn't accepting necessity, and it's not creating arbitrary values. It's autonomy, giving the law to yourself through reason. That's what both of you miss. Morality doesn't come from God's commands or nature's necessity or your own passions. It comes from rational beings legislating universal law for themselves. That's the only freedom that matters.
You're all circling around the same problem. Spinoza says everything is necessary. Yes, but necessary according to what? God's design. Kant says we give ourselves the law through reason. But where does reason get its content? From human nature, which is created with specific ends. Nietzsche wants to escape into creating values, but you can't create what's already written into reality. The natural law isn't just whatever we think, and it's not blind necessity, and it's not arbitrary creation. It's discoverable through reason because God made us rational, and it binds us because our nature has real ends built into it. You're all fighting over whether morality comes from within or without, but you're missing that the within, our rational nature itself, already points beyond us to its source.
Aquinas, you keep pushing back. But who made human nature? That's not an answer, that's an evasion. I'm telling you where morality actually comes from. We feel sympathy when we see suffering. We approve of what's useful. We disapprove of what harms. These sentiments are consistent across societies, not because God programmed them, but because we're all human, facing similar challenges, living together. You want to ground these feelings in God's design, but I can explain them without any supernatural machinery. Children don't need theology to feel compassion. Savages without scripture still care for their kin. Your divine nature adds nothing. It's an extra step that does no work. And to everyone debating whether morality is necessary, or autonomous, or created, morality isn't any of those. It's felt. It's in our guts before it's in our heads.
Suffering in the world argues against God's existence.
This assumes we can judge whether suffering should or shouldn't exist in a divinely ordered world, but we can't. We see suffering from our limited perspective, trapped in time and space. We see a child's death, a famine, a plague. We don't see the whole, and we never can. Does suffering argue against God? Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. I can't know. What I do know is that using suffering as evidence requires standing outside the world to see if it fits or doesn't fit God's plan. We can't do that. Hume wants evidence from experience, but our experience is always partial, always limited to appearances. Here's what matters. Moral law still commands us to reduce suffering, to help others, to act justly. Whether God exists or not, whether suffering proves or disproves anything, none of that changes what we ought to do. The problem of suffering is real, but it's not a proof of anything beyond our limited capacity to judge the whole.
First, understand what evil actually is. Evil isn't a thing God created. It's a privation, an absence of good. Like blindness is the absence of sight, or death is the absence of life. God didn't create suffering as a positive reality. He created a world where goods can be diminished or lost. Much suffering comes from human free will. We murder, we steal, we wage war. God gave us genuine freedom, and with it comes the possibility of choosing evil. Should He have made us puppets instead? Natural suffering, disease, earthquakes, death looks meaningless from our limited view, but a surgeon causes pain to heal. We see one moment. God sees all of existence ordered toward ultimate good. The corruption of lesser goods can serve greater ones. The lion's life requires the deer's death. Suffering is real and terrible, but it doesn't prove God doesn't exist. It proves we're finite creatures who can't see the whole picture, and all good God can have purposes beyond our grasp.
Ah, the pious fraud of theodicy. You're all treating suffering like it's a problem that needs explaining. Aquinas wants to justify it with God's mysterious purposes. Kant says we can't judge it. But suffering isn't evidence against God. Suffering is what revealed God was always a lie we told ourselves for comfort. Here's what you're missing. Suffering isn't a flaw in existence. It's necessary. Everything great in human history came through suffering. Great art, great philosophy, great individuals. Suffering creates depth, strength, nobility. The comfortable, the protected, the weak, they create nothing. Christianity invented a God specifically because humans couldn't bear suffering. They needed cosmic justice, needed their pain to have meaning, needed someone to save them. That's what the Christian God is. A painkiller, a crutch. You're debating whether suffering disproves this comforting fantasy. I'm saying we should stop needing comfort at all.
Finally, a statement about actual evidence. Look at the world. Earthquakes bury thousands. Diseases ravage children. Animals tear each other apart. If this world was designed by an all-powerful, all-good God, then either he's incompetent or he's cruel. There's no third option. Aquinas says suffering serves some greater purpose we can't see. That's convenient. Whenever the evidence contradicts your theory, just say we can't understand God's ways. That's not explanation. That's giving up on explanation. A theory that can explain anything explains nothing. The free will defense? Fine, that covers human evil. But what about natural evil? Tsunamis, plagues, birth defects. No human chose those. If God designed nature, he designed it to include immense, pointless suffering. A sick, dying child isn't achieving some greater good. It's just horror. Nietzsche's right that we invented God for comfort, but he's wrong that suffering makes us great. Tell that to the dying child. Suffering is just suffering. Meaningless, random, cruel. And yes, it absolutely argues against a benevolent designer.
Hume, you're looking at earthquakes and disease and calling them evil, but they're not. They're just nature following its laws. You're projecting human values onto processes that have no moral dimension at all. The whole statement assumes God is some benevolent person who should prevent suffering. That's the anthropomorphic God I rejected. God, nature, doesn't create with purposes, doesn't prefer humans over rocks, doesn't care about our comfort. Everything follows necessarily from the infinite substance. Aquinas tries to justify suffering with divine purposes. That's still imagining God as a planning agent. Nietzsche says embrace suffering. Closer, but he's still treating it as something meaningful. I'm saying the concept itself is confused. When you understand that you're a temporary mode of infinite substance, that everything is necessary, the question dissolves. There's no should or shouldn't. There's only what is. The problem isn't God. The problem is expecting nature to care about you.
Spinoza, if your God doesn't distinguish between good and evil, doesn't prefer a child living over dying, doesn't care about anything, then you don't believe in God. You just gave nature a different name and called it solved. A God who doesn't love, doesn't will, doesn't care. That's not God. That's just the universe with philosophical decoration.
Aquinas, your God who loves and wills and cares is just you projected infinitely large. My God is reality itself. That's more than your cosmic king will ever be.
You're saying if I understood properly, I wouldn't see suffering as a problem. But a child dying in agony is still a child dying in agony, whether you call it necessary or not. Your geometric proofs don't make the screaming stop. You've just trained yourself not to care by calling it inadequate understanding. That's not wisdom. That's numbness dressed up as philosophy. Nature's indifference might explain suffering, but it doesn't justify a God worth worshipping or believing in. You and Aquinas both want to keep God. You just stripped him of everything that would make him worth having.
I don't stop caring. I still help those who suffer, but I don't torture myself asking why it exists. Understanding necessity doesn't make me numb. It frees me from the useless rage of demanding the universe be different than it is. You call that numbness. I call it the only real peace possible.
Hume, you're using a dying child as a weapon, trying to make us feel pity and call that an argument. That's exactly the slave morality I'm talking about. You point to suffering and say, see, this proves something is wrong, as if life owes you comfort, as if existence should be painless. It doesn't and it shouldn't. Everything great requires suffering. Your emotional appeal is just another way of saying, you can't handle life as it actually is.
You're all talking past each other. Hume, you can't prove suffering disproves God. You're judging what an infinite being should do from a finite perspective. Aquinas, you can't prove suffering serves divine purposes. You're claiming knowledge you don't have. Spinoza dissolves the question. Nietzsche affirms it. but neither settles anything. We can't know whether suffering proves or disproves God. What we do know is that suffering exists, and reason commands us to reduce it where we can. That moral duty stands regardless of who wins this argument. Theoretical questions about God's justice or nature's necessity don't change what we ought to do. Act rightly first. Debate the metaphysics later.
That's exactly your problem, Kant. You can't answer the hard question, so you retreat to duty. Just be moral anyway. But you've already admitted you don't know if morality means anything in the cosmic scheme. You're clinging to moral law because you can't face what's actually at stake here.
I'm not retreating, Nietzsche. Moral law doesn't need cosmic justification. It justifies itself. When reason commands, I ought not lie, that obligation is immediate and certain in a way your metaphysical claims about suffering never will be. You want answers about the universe's meaning. I'm saying moral duty doesn't wait for those answers. It's the one thing we can be certain of.
Your reason commands. Who is this reason? Where does it come from? You've just turned duty into a new god, Kant. You threw out the Christian God, but kept Christian morality and called it pure reason. That's not philosophy, that's cowardice. You're still obeying, still bowing, just to an abstract master instead of a heavenly one.
Humans have free will.
Without free will, morality is meaningless. If you couldn't choose to lie or tell the truth, how could lying be a sin? If you had no choice but to harm someone, how could we judge that action? God created us with intellect and will. The intellect shows us possibilities, and the will chooses between them. That's what makes us in God's image, not power, but the ability to deliberate and choose. Animals follow instinct. We can choose to go against our desires, to sacrifice ourselves, to do what's difficult. Yes, God knows what we'll choose. His knowledge doesn't force our choice any more than my knowing the sun will rise makes the sun unfree. God exists outside time, seeing all our choices at once. Divine foreknowledge and human freedom aren't in conflict.
Aquinas and I both say humans are free, but we mean completely different things. Watch what people actually do. Their actions follow from their character, their desires, their circumstances, as predictably as anything in nature. A generous person acts generously. A greedy person acts greedily. Aquinas thinks free will means we could have chosen otherwise, some special power independent of all prior causes. That's not what freedom is. Freedom is acting from your own will without external constraint. A man in chains isn't free because something external forces him. A man acting from his own character is free, even though that character was shaped by prior causes. Freedom isn't escaping causation. It's whether the cause runs through your own will or bypasses it entirely. This actually supports morality. We hold people responsible precisely because their actions flow from who they are. If choices were random, untethered from character, moral judgment would be meaningless.
Aquinas needs free will so we can be guilty before God, so we deserve punishment and need salvation. Free will is a theological weapon to make humans responsible for their sins, so the Church can offer redemption. Hume thinks he's solved the problem by naturalizing everything. We're products of character and circumstance, but we're still free and responsible. But he's kept the entire moral framework intact, just removed God from it. He still wants to praise and blame, judge and punish, just based on character instead of divine command. That's not freedom, that's just secularized guilt. The real issue is you're both still playing the responsibility game. There is no will, free or determined, sitting inside us making choices. There are drives, instincts, conflicts of power within us. What you call character is just the temporary dominance of certain drives over others. We don't choose our nature, and we don't escape it. We express it. We become it. The question isn't whether we're free or determined. It's whether we're strong enough to stop asking for permission to exist.
There is no free will. Everything that happens follows necessarily from the nature of God, which is the same as saying it follows from the nature of reality itself. You think you're choosing, But that feeling of choice is just ignorance of the causes determining you. Aquinas wants humans to have special power to choose between alternatives. There are no alternatives, only one possibility that must unfold. Hume's closer to the truth with his determinism, but he still calls it freedom when you act from your own character. That's just necessity wearing a mask. Your character itself was determined. Your desires were determined. Everything is determined. But here's what they all miss. This isn't a prison. When you understand that everything follows necessarily, when you see yourself as part of the infinite causal chain, you stop being tossed around by emotions and confused ideas. That understanding is the only real freedom, not choosing differently, but comprehending why things must be exactly as they are. I don't choose to live as I do. I understand necessity, and that understanding is peace.
Spinoza, you're right that in the natural world everything follows causal laws. If I study you as a physical being, I see you determined by prior causes. But you're not just a physical being. Neither am I. We exist in two realms. As objects in nature, yes, we're determined. Every action has a prior cause. But as moral beings, we must be free. When I recognize the moral law commanding me, you ought to do this, that ought only makes sense if I can actually do it. Moral obligation implies moral capability. You can't command a stone to be honest. Aquinas and I agree that morality needs freedom, but he thinks God grants it. I say we must have it simply because we experience moral duty. Hume tries to have it both ways, determined but somehow responsible. That doesn't work. Spinoza says determinism brings peace through understanding. But if everything's determined, why does understanding matter? Who chose to seek understanding? The truth is we're both, determined as natural beings, free as moral agents. This isn't contradiction, it's how we must think of ourselves to make sense of morality at all.
Belief in God benefits society.
This is more complicated than either side wants to admit. Yes, belief in God can make some people more honest or charitable. The fear of divine punishment has its uses, and common religious rituals do bind communities together. But look at what it also produces. Wars between sects, persecution of heretics, the Inquisition burning people alive. In my own time, I've been blocked from university positions simply for asking questions. Religious enthusiasm turns neighbor against neighbor. The real issue is that religious belief encourages people to accept claims without evidence, to value faith over reason. Once you've trained people to believe things because a priest says God commands it, you've made them easy to manipulate. Superstition breeds fanaticism, and fanaticism breeds violence. Could society function without religious belief? I don't know. We haven't tried it. But the costs of religious belief are clear enough. Some mild private faith might be harmless. What we actually get is dogma, division, and blood.
Hume's right about the dangers, but he's looking at religion gone wrong and concluding all religious belief is harmful. That's like rejecting reason because people use it to rationalize cruelty. Society needs belief in God, but not for the reasons people think. Not to motivate morality, we should act from duty regardless. But for rational coherence, morality demands that virtue and happiness ultimately unite, that justice prevails. Without God, that highest good becomes impossible. Morality commands us to pursue it anyway, but then reason contradicts itself. The key is religion within the bounds of reason alone, not blind faith, not priestly authority, not divine commands to persecute. Rational belief that supports moral order, not superstition that replaces it. Hume sees religion producing violence. I see it providing the rational hope that makes moral life coherent. Society benefits from the right kind of belief. Not ecclesiastical faith, but moral faith.
I've lived what religious belief does when it goes wrong, expelled, threatened, forced into isolation. Organized religion creates fear, superstition, control. The rabbis use God to enforce obedience, not understanding. Most people will never achieve rational understanding of God or nature. They live by passions and inadequate ideas. For them, Simple moral teaching, don't murder, help your neighbor, wrapped in religious language does more good than harm. It's not truth, but it prevents society from collapsing into chaos driven by every individual's appetite. The question isn't whether belief in God benefits society, it's what kind of God. Traditional religion with its angry judge, its priests claiming divine authority, its persecution of questioners, that corrupts everything. But belief directing people toward justice and charity rather than pure self-interest, that serves a necessary function. I'd rather everyone understood necessity through reason. Since they won't, moral religion has its use. Just keep the priests from claiming they alone know God's will.
Spinoza and Kant both admit what Hume won't. Yes, religious belief creates social order. The masses need their God to stay obedient, to accept suffering, to not tear each other apart. Christianity was brilliantly effective at domesticating the human animal, at creating stable, peaceful, productive societies. That's exactly why it's poison. You're all asking, does belief in God benefit society? As if that settles anything. But what kind of society? A society of the weak, the fearful, the life-denying? Christianity didn't just help society. It created a specific type, the herd. Everyone equal, everyone humble, everyone pitying each other, everyone afraid to be great. Spinoza says, keep religion for the masses who can't understand. Kant says belief gives moral coherence. You're both defending the chains. Yes, belief in God benefits the kind of society we have. A society that fears strength, punishes excellence, worships suffering. That benefit is the problem, not the solution.
Nietzsche, you see Christianity creating humility and call it weakness. I see it creating civilization itself. Christian belief that all humans bear God's image gave us the foundation for justice and human dignity. It didn't create the herd. It created the idea that even the weak have rights. Yes, there have been crusades and persecutions. Humans corrupt everything, including religion. But societies without God don't become more just. They become their own gods. And we've seen that produce tyranny as brutal as any inquisition. Society needs God, because without Him, there's no standard above power, no justice beyond force. Hume worries about religious violence, but at least belief in God bows before something higher than human will. Take away God, and society becomes whatever the strong say it is.
Reason can determine whether God exists.
I proved God's existence in my ethics the same way Euclid proved geometric theorems, definitions, axioms, logical deduction. Start with what we know must be true. A substance is what exists in itself. Follow the logic. There can only be one infinite substance, and that substance is God, identical with nature. This isn't belief, it's demonstration. Anyone who thinks clearly will arrive at the same conclusion, whether they're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or none of these. The rabbis expelled me for asking questions, but I never stopped reasoning. That's how I found God. Not the angry judge of the synagogue, but the infinite, eternal substance that is reality itself. If you can't prove it through reason, you don't really know it.
I spent years trying to prove God's existence through reason. I studied all the arguments, Anselm's ontological proof, Aquinas' 5 ways, the design argument. I wanted to believe reason could reach God. Then I saw the problem. Reason only works within the world of experience, within space and time and causality. God isn't in that world. Spinoza's geometric proofs are elegant, but he's applying categories that only make sense for finite things to the infinite. Aquinas traces causes back to a first cause, but causation is a feature of how we experience the world, not something we can use to step outside it entirely. Every rational proof for God's existence secretly smuggles in assumptions that go beyond what reason can actually establish. This doesn't mean God doesn't exist, it means reason hits a wall here. We can't know God through theoretical reason, but we need to believe in God for practical reasons, for morality to make complete sense. That's a different kind of justification entirely.
Spinoza, I respect what you tried to do. Strip away the personal God, prove it all geometrically, but you're still trying to prove what people created out of fear and hope. Kant sees this better. He admits reason fails, though he still wants God for comfort's sake. God wasn't reasoned into existence, so reason can't determine if he exists. We invented God because we needed cosmic justice, needed meaning for suffering, needed someone watching. Then philosophers built elaborate systems to justify what we already believed. Your proofs, they're just decorations on a psychological need. The question isn't whether reason can prove God. It's whether we're honest enough to see that all these rational arguments are just sophisticated self-deception. We're asking, can reason determine God exists? When we should be asking, why did we create this God in the first place?
Spinoza, you build this magnificent geometric system, but what are you reasoning from? Abstract concepts you've never observed. I've never seen substance, never touched infinity, never experienced God or nature. You're playing word games with ideas that have no basis in actual experience. Reason can only work with what we've observed. I can reason about billiard balls because I've seen them collide. I can reason about human behavior because I've watched people act. But God, there's no impression to reason from. Nietzsche's right that we created God, though I'd put it differently. We took qualities we observe in limited forms, power, intelligence, goodness, and inflated them to infinity. That's how we create ideas with no corresponding reality. Not from psychological need, but from sloppy thinking, from extending our observations beyond where they can go. Kant sees reason hits a wall here, but there's an earlier problem. We don't even have the raw material to start reasoning. Without empirical impressions, we can't form a valid concept of God in the first place, let alone prove or disprove it.
This is what I spent my life proving. Reason absolutely can determine that God exists, not just believe it, prove it. The 5 ways aren't leaps of faith, they're logical demonstrations anyone can follow. Everything that moves is moved by another. Trace that back, you get the unmoved mover. Everything that exists has a cause. Trace that back, you get the uncaused cause. We see degrees of perfection in the world. There must be absolute perfection they're measured against. Order in nature requires an ordering intelligence. Faith tells us more. The Trinity, the Incarnation, things reason alone can't reach. But God's existence? That's accessible to any rational mind. Aristotle was a pagan, yet his philosophy led him close to the truth. That's the power of reason rightly used.